So just to give you a little tiny bit of a background, so about 5 years ago, I literally collapsed. Like I felt something coming on for a couple years, but I just kept pushing through. And then one day I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand, I couldn't speak. I've been battling this for 5 years, and up until only about 6 months ago, I wouldn't even be able to speak on the phone with you. I couldn't walk by myself. I had to have someone take care of me at all times. I was very, very, very severe. So ozone doesn't always keep me out of the wheelchair, but if I don't have ozone, I absolutely will end up in the wheelchair. Before I started ozone, I never had a good day. There was no end in sight. I didn't know if I would ever get better. I'd say within a year, I maybe had one decent day, and my decent day was maybe that I could make it downstairs without almost passing out. So what's happened with ozone is if I don't have ozone, I end up back there. And I can't go more than 3 to 4 weeks. And one time they ran out when I had the IV, we couldn't get the bottles, so I didn't have ozone for about a month. I ended up going right back down to the bottom, severe wheelchair. Couldn't even get myself out of the wheelchair or into the chair. I had to have someone lift me up. Okay, so I got back on ozone, started making progress, Then one time the ozone sauna broke for 3-4 weeks. I ended up back in the same exact situation. And then COVID hit, I couldn't get ozone. I ended up back in the same situation. So if I don't have ozone, I go back to the very, very, very bottom level of pretty much being a vegetable. Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, at times, even though I'm on ozone consistently, I can still go to that level, but with ozone, it's less frequent. I can get over it easier. So ozone doesn't ensure 100% that I won't go to that level. But if I don't have ozone, I 100% guarantee that I will go to that level quickly. Well, for the first couple years, I never had a good day. Then after I started ozone, I might have like 2 or 3 horrible months and maybe 1 or 2 decent weeks before the 3 or 4 horrible months again. The longer I've done ozone, the longer decent spells I've had, and I can get over those horrible spells quicker. And so now that I've had ozone 3 years, I can have a break of a few months in between that are decent. And now actually some days are actually kind of good, where before ozone that never happened. And the longer I have ozone, the more frequently I have it, the longer periods I go of having decent spells. And I didn't drive for 5 years, and I just started driving a little bit about 3 months ago. I'm progressively having better spells, longer periods of good spells, or kind of good spells.
Can you describe more what happens when you are in the vegetative state?
Okay, so that's when the POTS symptoms kick in really severely. So I feel like my body is overtaken with infection. And when I get that feeling of just the infections going crazy, so I have severe shortness of breath, horrible dizziness. Like if I were to try just to walk, 10 steps, I would just about pass out. I have to hold on to someone or walls because I can't even stand long enough to get, sometimes just to use the bathroom, I have to have someone just walk me or wheel me. Shortness of breath, dizziness, severe fatigue, very, very, very difficult to speak. I usually have to use like hand signs because trying to force any breath out, I almost pass out because it does something to my lungs. I even have an issue that's kind of embarrassing, but if it helps somebody else, I'd like to share it. And I even get bowel incontinence just out of nowhere. I mean, and then the brain fog is so severe, like I can't even remember the simplest things. Like I have to take a Post-it with me just to go to the other room to remember what I needed to do in that room. I have a hard time speaking, thinking. I get very emotional. I just get really teary. And I don't know if it's because I can't do anything for myself or it affects my emotions. I'm not sure of that part yet. Pain too. I get a lot of hip pain, knee pain, joint pain in my fingers.
Did the ozone IVs have a stronger effect on you than the ozone saunas?
Honestly, I felt no difference. And that's what was so hard for me to believe. I kept thinking, the sauna's not going to work. How is a sauna going to work? It's not going into my blood. I was very apprehensive. But because I got the blood clot, I could no longer do the IVs. So I thought, what do I have to lose? And honestly, I felt the exact same effects positively from it. No difference.
Are you doing the regular ozone saunas or the H.pylori?
So I do PromoLife, the regular. So my doctor has it. So we would go 130 miles round trip 1 to 2 times a week. And I finally got my own about in November. Same exact one.
Do you have the hard shell or the soft shell sauna?
The hard shell. The hard shell, right. With the dual elite ozone generator. And I do the concentrator to breathe oxygen and as well as use for ozone. That's what my doctor did. He said it gives a much bigger boost.
How often do you do the sauna?
So, okay, when I had to drive to my doctor's, I would do it 1 to 2 times a week. Now that I'm at home, I do it 2 to 3 times a week. And then I used to do 30 minutes because we would drive so far and it was so expensive. I would just force myself, but I was starting to get pretty sick after 20 minutes. So my doctor and I decided that 20 to 25 minutes is optimal. And now that I don't have to drive so far or pay so much for it, I'm okay doing less time. I try to do 20 to 25. 30 seems to be a little bit too much on my body, but I can if I have to. And a lot of times when I'm really bad, the ozone makes me worse for about 3 weeks. So whenever I have to go without it because it's broken or whatever, the first 3 weeks are worse. And I feel very horrible immediately after ozone. But it's always about the 3-week mark that sure enough, I start noticing the benefits again and it really kicks it in. And if I can do it twice a week over once a week, it really makes a big difference in getting through that spell.
Was it scary to experience the worsening the first time around?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was awful. And it's funny because you kind of forget, going through it for 5 years, I kind of forget and I'll be like, what is wrong? And my husband will remind me, sweetie, remember, every time we go through this, it takes about 3 weeks. So, when you're in the midst of it and you're so sick, you can't decipher everything right. And so fortunately, my mom and my husband who take care of me when I'm like that, they remind me that's just kind of the cycle I have to go through.
How were you diagnosed and with what?
Sure. So when I first just pretty much collapsed, I went into hospital because we had no idea what was wrong. The hospital ran all their tests and they pretty much diagnosed me as psychosomatic, saying it was in my head. And I kind of had heard this before about 13 years earlier when I had an episode, but it was shorter. And they told me, it was probably just stress all in my head. So I was really hesitant to try to seek help because they made me think I was crazy. So then I was so sick. And at that time, I was teaching a Bible study with another person at my church. So we were the leaders together. And she said, I think that you really should see my doctor. And I knew that she had a health, 13, 14, 15 doctors to try to find out why she was having strokes and having all these symptoms. So she said, I think you should see my doctor. And I said, I don't have Lyme. I don't hike, whatever. I don't have any of that. And she said, well, okay, let's say you don't. My doctor is so good and he's so different. He tests for things that regular doctors don't test for. If you don't have it, he'll tell you what you do have. And worst case scenario, he'll tell you don't have anything. So I thought, okay, why not? So we got into him, but they ran just, all these tests, took a thorough history. And sure enough, they found it all. I was so fortunate because traditional doctors would have never found it because I'd been to many before through the years. So I felt like something was not right. So he's a a rheumatologist, but he's an integrative doctor who specializes in Lyme and tick-borne illnesses and all these things that no other doctors do. He ran a bunch of blood work and, all the non-standard tests and found all of that. And he said I was a very, very severe case.
Was it the Western blot test?
So he ran, I feel like he ran the Western blot and Alyssa, I believe. But the thing is they're so unreliable that you get false negatives. But you have to have, technically, to be CDC positive, you have to have, I think it was 5 of the bands. And I didn't have 5, but all my other supporting tests that shows like the CD57 was extremely low. So there's a lot of supporting tests that said, okay, this is what the report says, but I'm interpreting it different because of all the supporting tests that are showing that you have this, and this, when you look at it as a whole.
What did your doctor suggest as a therapy?
So at first, though, I had really high levels of H.pylori. And so he said that we had to treat that first because otherwise my gut wouldn't process any of the supplements or antibiotics or anything else I needed to target all the infections. And he actually wanted to treat Rocky Mountain spotted fever as soon as we could because he said that shuts down your organs. And he said that was very time sensitive for me to target that. But what would happen is I tried herbs and supplements for a round, didn't affect the H. pylori. I tried another round, didn't help it at all. Then I went on the antibiotics, didn't help it at all. So we could not get rid of the H. pylori. And we started having to wash all of my produce, fruits, vegetables, everything in water and vinegar, soaking everything to try to make sure I wasn't putting any form of additional stuff in my gut that would increase that load, but nothing was helping. So he had to go ahead and just start me on treatments. And it kind of shifted. We targeted Rocky Mountain spotted fever first because it was the most serious for my organs, but then we shifted and we treated for, he said the treatments somewhat overlap between Bartonella, Babesia, Lyme, and Rocky Mountain. Some of them are the same and some of them are different. So at times he would just shift with different supplements, different antibiotics. We would rerun tests. He would look at my symptoms, see how everything was going. And I just wasn't getting better. Nothing was helping. And I think one day I just kind of broke down in his office and I said, I'm not making any progress. I can't. I'm not living. I'm pretty much a vegetable. Couldn't even speak for myself. He said, okay. He said, well, have you thought of an alternative therapy, ozone? And I just remember thinking, well, I know ozone's bad for the environment. You hear of the ozone layer. He's like, no. We're having some good results with it. And I think he had just started it. So I thought, I'm so desperate, I'll try anything. Oh, and then what happened at first, okay, so when I first started the ozone, the IV, I actually did get a little bit worse and I was getting severe headaches. So we determined that the ozone was killing off a lot of the bad stuff, but my body wasn't detoxing it. It was recirculating it. So I actually did end up getting worse. So then he tried different binders and we finally figured out the right combination, the right dosage of binders to work simultaneously with the ozone. And then at that point, then I started feeling some progress.
What type of ozone IV have you received?
It was a saline. So the saline and ozone, I guess, were mixed together and it just went right into my blood.
How important is diet for you?
Yes, huge. Diet's huge. So I will say, though, that I think over time also we figured out the right dosage, the right antibiotics, the right supplements, the right herbs. I think that kind of went hand in hand with ozone. But I feel like ozone's still the primary. So also huge dietary changes. And for me, I would say after ozone, diet's probably the single most important factor where I can tell that affects me. So especially with pot, like the nightshades really affect me, but I've gone completely gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, very, very minimal sugar. And about a year ago, year and a half, when I almost completely got off grains, I also noticed a shift for the better too, like just another little level of improvement. So my diet is extremely strict, and I eat all organic, like 99% organic. Like one wrong meal could really set me back, where I wake up the next day and I can barely walk out of bed. When I was so sick, my mom had to move back to my state to live with me to cook, because I just couldn't even do anything. And we just noticed how important diet and even juicing, we juice. So those things are vital. I say under ozone, that's probably the next most important thing is my diet. I know in my heart and in my body, without ozone, I would be probably close to where I was in the beginning. It was the catalyst that made anything else seem to work. Is the one thing I know I can't do without. I would give up anything before I give up ozone, anything.